Matthaeus.
Right, so I understand that you were expected to read that. I'm sorry about that. It's a book that consists, as you have seen, of a lot of context and documentation. It's labeled a diary, but what did you find perhaps surprising when you looked at table of contents or when you flipped through them? Well, it's not only has a diary, but it has supplementary documentation. And that documentation usually gives you an idea that the key source has some issues. So little diary, but other stuff included, and quite significantly in terms of size. So indeed there are many problems with this diary. First, most of it is not a diary at all. These are diary pages. There is the first part that Rosenberg wrote, that was actually a bound volume. The original is now housed it has been in the National Archive for decades, since the end of the Nuremberg proceedings. Rosenberg, as you might know, born 1893 in Tallinn, was there in Reval, came to Germany in 1918 after the Soviet Revolution, and then blended into the emerging right-wing radical subculture in Munich and became a key Nazi functionary close to Hitler. In fact, he was replacing Hitler when Hitler was in jail and was a party leader, not very successful. Hitler knew that, of course, because he wanted someone who was weak. Rosenberg did the job and stuck around, focused on ideology, and that's the way he's perceived in historiography to the largest degree. However, what we want to do with that book is to highlight his role not so much as a propagandist and an ideologue, but as a politician. What do you know about his politics or his political role?
He had a role in bringing about like Nazi schooling.
Right, so that's his first, if you like, portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
So he comes from editing the Völkische Beobachter, which is the key Nazi newspaper, very active in the publication and education field, many books, most of them explicitly anti-Semitic or at least anti-Semitism heavily baked in. His biggest success in terms of publication was Mythos des 20. Jahrhunderts, which is the myth of the 20th century, which sold more than 1 million copies until 1945. And that is the second most successful book issued by the Nazi regime. The first, of course, is Mein Kampf. Can't be that one, because it comes straight from the top, but he was kind of right behind the Führer in a way. And he always wanted to be close to the Führer, but only got a ministerial portfolio, unlike Goebbels, unlike Göring, unlike Ribbentrop, fairly late. In 1940 already he assumed a position that massively expanded his role because he became the head of what was called Einsatzstab Rosenberg, which started off as a kind of a looting agency, getting artwork out of particularly Jewish possession into Germany to use for museums, private collections, and so on. That then morphed into something much bigger, and in the end the Einsatzstab was also massively involved in deportation of forced laborers, particularly from Eastern occupied territories. His key role, however, and that's the one that is really relevant to the Holocaust, is that as the Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern territories. His appointment dates from the 17th of July 1941. However, he is involved already in the planning phase of Operation Barbarossa, the German attack on the Soviet Union starting on 22nd of June 1941. So he's a key figure, if you like, close to Hitler and a key thinker in areas where other Nazis would not either spend much time or didn't find it relevant. Another thing sets him apart, which is the fact that he kept a diary. And even if it's fragmentary, there there is only one other diary writer among the top Nazis, and that's Goebbels. Goebbels was much more systematic, a very disciplined diary writer, a massive amount of material, systematically compiled by him and then systematically preserved in a multitude of formats, and all that had been published. All right, so this was, a part of that was submitted as evidence for the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg as part of the Rosenberg diary. Then something strange happened. It was after the end of the trial, the material was supposed to be taken over by government agencies, either primarily at the time brought to America, where it would end up in the National Archive. Later on, there was a fight between the US and Germany as to the restitution of these kind of materials, and everything that the Germans could claim, they did claim. Some of it stayed at NARA, the other things were, other documents were transferred to the Federal Archive. Rosenberg's diary, with the exception of this piece for 1934-35, was not amongst that stuff. It wasn't at the National Archive, it wasn't in the German Archive. So where was it? It turns out, to make a long story short, and if you want to hear more on that, please ask. It was privatized by someone who was actually the prosecutor in the subsequent Nuremberg trial. He kept it in his house. He quoted from it on occasion, but he had a problem, like everyone has who steals important documents, because you can't quote them in a proper way. So instead of saying this is file X such from National Archive or RG 14-001 from the Holocaust Memorial Museum, he could only reference it as copies from my archive. And every historian would immediately see that there's something wrong here, that it's either not, he doesn't have the originals, or he has the originals, but he shouldn't really, because you wouldn't call it my archive if you would be certain about the possession or the rightfulness of the possession. So it took a while for the museum to get this material here. It took some years. Initially, the papers of Robert Kempner, who is the person in question here, the prosecutor, his heirs had promised his archive to the museum. When museum staff went there, I was among them to look at the stuff. The diary was not to be found. We all had a strong hunch that it should be somewhere, but it was, again, nowhere. Since then, the whole issue got even more murky, because between then and the actual takeover of the bulk of the papers, other stuff vanished. So the whole collection basically dispersed into different hands. And it took a long time for the museum, particularly Henry Mayer, the then archivist here at the Holocaust Museum, to bring it all together. One of the latest pieces added to it was then the Rosenberg diary. It comes from another government agency that had threatened the person who had, had it in his possession, although not legitimately so, to hand it over, because clearly that was government property. That happened around 2013. I think we went to look at the material in 2013. So what do you do with this kind of stuff? You have a heap of paper. As I said, it's not a diary. It's a one bound volume. It's the National Archive. But the rest were just loose papers. And the agency, the government agency that had intercepted that material, had no idea what they were looking at. So the first thing we need to do is to try to authenticate, right? This could be anything really. How do you know? It had no kind of name on it. It wasn't labeled in any way, just a bunch of loose papers. So we spent a short time actually figuring out what it was, and it was pretty clear pretty quickly that this is indeed the diary. So one thing is easy to do, and that is compare handwriting. There were microfilm copies and original documents with Rosenberg's hand, and here you had a whole set of things written by him. So that's fairly easy. And then of course there's the context. What's he writing about? Does it make any sense in conjunction with what we know about his career? And all of it did. So after getting this stuff and authenticating that this was not only real, but also written by Rosenberg, then the question was, well, we want to make this as public and as fast as possible. So that's when the museum put the material online in digital format. But as this is in German, we wanted not to publish not only the German version, but also the English, and that's where this book comes in. The reason why we have a lot of context, by way of introductory text, and a second set of documents, supplementary documents, again has to do with the fact that there is stuff missing. There is not only pages missing, entire months aren't there, and particularly the month, the crucial phase of the Holocaust, decision making and implementation, from the summer to end of 41, and most of 1942 is just not there. Whether he didn't write or stuff was burned, we do not know. But it seems pretty clear that what was in the possession of Robert Kempner, we got. So he did not do anything with it that caused these gaps. It must have happened before Kempner took that stuff over, which means it could still surface. I think the chances are not very high. So we had to work our way around these gaps. And one way to do this, when you work historically, is to look for other documentation. What did he do at the time that's not covered in his diary? What can we attest to in terms of his activity, his thinking? And luckily, there is a large amount of material that was compiled in conjunction with the Nuremberg trials that addresses these very issues, and a massive amount of correspondence and memoranda from the spring of 1941 onwards, where we get an idea as to what Rosenberg was planning for the occupation of the Soviet Union. And that is quite extensive and also detailed. It doesn't address much of what we understand now to be the Holocaust. It is a little bit indirect. It clearly doesn't contain a smoking gun. So there is nothing in there that would say the Führer ordered the extermination of the European Jews. It's not there. But that's also not what we would expect, given where we know now about the emergence of the final solution. Because, and I don't know what you have read or heard about this so far, it seems that if Hitler gave an order at all, it was fairly late in the game. And the evolution, or the passing of the threshold from mass persecution to mass extermination happened on a sliding scale, with the Germans passing the border onto the Soviet Union. In different localities, in different regions, more intense than others, before it became an overall pattern. And that you find also reflected in the planning phase, where there is very little concrete information on what Rosenberg, Hitler, or others have in mind, and it's all shrouded in kind of in general kind of planning. What Rosenberg brings to the table specifically is a rather unique orientation towards an overall extremely ambitious and particularly European goal. So if there is someone who is thinking along the lines of the Europeanization of the final solution, that's Rosenberg. And that's not so much the other folks at the time. And he gets appointed to that extremely crucial position of Vice Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. Millions of people, huge territory from the Baltic Sea to the Caspian Sea, as it is conceived originally. Of course, the Germans don't make it. that far. They get stuck in front of Moscow towards the end of 41. But still a massive amount of territory and people. And in that territory, Rosenberg can contribute to the escalation of events. So what you know about the Einsatzgruppen is not just a topic that relates to the SS and the police. There's also, at least in the western part of the occupied Soviet Union, a strong component of civil administration. The civil administration are the people Rosenberg has appointed. And he has guidelines that he gives to his folks when they start to come to the Soviet Union in the first weeks of the occupation. Let me give you an example here from guidelines that were issued in September 41. So that's when some of his folks are already on the ground, particularly in the Baltic states, and more were to come then as further the German army advances. So I quote from this document, Guidelines to his civil administrators. All measures on the Jewish question in the occupied eastern areas have to be taken with a view towards the solution of the Jewish question after the war for all of Europe. The experiences gained in dealing with the Jewish question in the East can show the direction for solving the overall problem, due to the fact that Jews in these areas form, together with the Jews in the Generalgouvernement, the strongest contingent of European Jewry. Sounds pretty strategic to me. This is someone who, although he's an ideologue, although he's an opportunist, there's a kind of a grand plan that is really European in scope. That's about the same time when he writes in his diary that, and I quote here verbatim, history is looking us over the shoulder. So he's aware of his historic role, which is, I think, part also why he maintained that diary, although he hated diary writing. That's what he writes himself in his diary pages on occasion. So there is a chance here, and the chance is to do something of a really grand scale. He is reluctant to get involved with the details. So there is no direct reference to mass killings, and he's happy, as we can see from his other papers, with his in the exchanges of his office in Berlin with the SS. He's very happy that the SS does the dirty work. Himmler is more than keen on kind of having the full control of the executive functions, because he has the executive forces. But Rosenberg, although he's very much an opponent of, or a rival rather, of Himmler, has no problem in leaving that to the police and SS, and that's exactly what happens. So the civil administration doesn't stay out. They are in charge of the ghetto administration. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of where the allocation of food stuff occurs, how the boundaries get drawn. The SS later takes over, but initially they are just there for the guarding and for making sure that there is no kind of security issue. So I want to kind of cut this short so to leave you some time for discussion. I just want to close with a statement that Rosenberg made in November the 18th, 1941. So this is really the time when, as many historians think, there is a turning point. There is something coming together here where what had been isolated events is now gelling into a coherent genocidal policy. And that's what he says in this press briefing in Berlin. This East is called up to solve a question that is posed to the peoples of Europe. This is the Jewish question. Around 6 million Jews still live in the East, and this problem can be solved only by a biological eradication of all of Jewry in Europe. The Jewish question is only solved for Germany when the last Jew has left German territory, and solved for Europe when not a single Jew stands on the European continent up to the Urals. There again you have it. This is pretty all-encompassing. Rosenberg is often saying things that are close to what Hitler has said or what Hitler might have thought and voiced to him. We then have the evolution of the final solution. As you know, it goes in a different direction. So far as the area where Rosenberg is in charge is not really where the European dimension is taken care of. Excuse my phrasing here. But that's further west, in Poland, in the death camps. The reason has to do with the fact that the war gets stuck at the front line. Logistics are difficult. German transports have trouble, deportation transport in really reaching these areas. They're still ongoing well into 43, partly even later. But the gist of the destruction, the mass murder operations are pretty much then moving towards the west. The SS recognizes that Rosenberg in that phase, late 41, early 42, is crucial. His people are the only ones who are invited to the Wannsee Conference, two of these people. Every other agency only has one representative, with the exception of the SS, of course. So that's an indication, I think, that he is someone who is important, and not just an ideologue, but clearly a big practitioner of genocide.
No, thank you very much for a very important and illuminating talk on an important subject matter. We, of course, read in the class Christian Gerlach's survey, who, of course, was also a key contributor to the debates at the time. But now, right, questions, concerns about anything you just heard. Want to launch some disagreement, getting more interesting then, by all means, please, that's what we do. But also, of course, questions about process, of analysis, of working with us. I gave you a page, of the diary, right, as it is in here, available in the archives. I mean, not here, but offsite location, but nonetheless to give you more of a flavor of the type of source. But what questions or comments do you have on Dr. Matthaeus' talk?
You said that he hated keeping a diary, but does he ever state why he kept a diary?
He thought he wasn't really the type. He invested his writing efforts, and they were quite massive, during office hours. So he felt little, if any, inclination to sit down after hours and then write again his kind of personal reflection. He seemed to have not baked it into his work routine. So that left kind of the after hours, and he wasn't successful in establishing a routine, and that's what he says. He's not good at it, and he doesn't like it.
Other questions? Other comments?
Do you think it matters, Rosenberg, and his importance, or is this kind of is it irrelevant because he's a Nazi and that's it? Good enough?
I mean, I think it's important because it erases that conception that Hitler was the be-all, end-all to the Holocaust, like the main head, when he had all these people working under him who were doing much more work to eradicate European Jewry.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And also, I think a lot of what you read focuses on Himmler.
Mm-hmm.
He's seen as kind of Hitler's right arm. And that is true to a large extent, but it doesn't reflect the full set of realities. So I think you hit really the right tone there.
Do we have any additional resources on his fleeing from the revolution to Germany, like how that impacted his decision to join the
There's next to nothing known on this chapter in his life. There was quite some speculation, even in the 20s, 30s, and following, even on his ancestry, whether he was Jewish. You will still read about this. I don't think there's any evidence for this. Rosenberg is, of course, often a Jewish-sounding name, but this is also a name that's associated with ethnic Germans in the Baltic. So there was a speculation that he was actually active in the Communist Party in Moscow. There's no evidence. And from what we know, I would be very surprised if this is true. But it leaves this entire chapter very murky. However, what is clear is that he is perceived by his peers as the expert on the Soviet system, because he was there. He knows what's happening, he speaks the language. And that's also one of the reasons why Hitler comes to him in spring 41 and says, what would you advise on how we should proceed here? And so that's when his star is really rising.
More questions, more feedback. Obviously, one of the reasons why I asked Dr. Matthaeus to present on the subject matter is not with an eye on what you all might dig up or find or trace down in whatever agency in this town or whatsoever, but also what do you do? I mean, with a fascinating multi-layered source like this, how to relate it to the ongoing debates, how do you interpret something like that? And of course, he very skillfully addressed many of these questions and the like. Final comments, final feedback, praise, criticism, and the like. Anything?
I have a quick question. I'm not a student, so.
Oh.
But I was curious how you, or if you were able to find places where Kemper or others were actually making those quotations, either in transcripts or documentation during the trials, that would help kind of back up the thought that even that misplaced material did and was there.
Right, well it's interesting because although it was entered into evidence and his defense asked for having access to it, it couldn't be found even during the trial anymore. So all of that leads me to believe that it was initially registered, it was entered into evidence in extracts, and then it vanished. I don't know what message is perhaps involved in that project for you and while you undertake your own projects, but again, keep digging because although you would see a library of books here, 110,000, which is of course more than overwhelming, there is still a lot that hasn't been unearthed, that is worth being dealt with in greater detail. And it could be a range of topics, it could be individual documents, approaches, the way you get to the topic and what you make of it. I think I can only encourage you to pursue your interest, that there should be room for a lot of what you think is interesting.
Okay, please help me thank Dr. Matthaeus again. Thank you.
Have a nice day.